The first story for today, The Old School and the Wandering Spirits. The old folks used to say, never build a house or stay where battles once raged. The lingering resentment of the dead still haunts such places. But after the war, in a time of hardship and hunger, no one had the luxury of choice. And my mother, along with her schoolmates, paid the price in sleepless, terrifying nights. Her story serves as a grim reminder that there are places meant for the dead, and the living should never trespass.
Let me recount this tale. A story in which the main character is none other than my mother herself. Even now, whenever she speaks of it, a chill runs down her spine, and goosebumps rise on her skin. It all happened around 1976, just a year after the country was reunified. Though the sound of gunfire had ceased, peace did not bring comfort. In the rural countryside, people lived in poverty. Families stretched thin meals with cassava or sweet potatoes. Some had nothing more than a pot of rice porridge to survive the day. Clothes were patched up again and again. The lucky ones wore faded ba-ba shirts and worn-out rubber sandals. Adults bent their backs in the fields under the scorching sun. Children hunted for crabs and fish in murky canals. With no electricity, no clean water, and little medicine, the sick often had no choice but to rely on incense and prayers. At the time, my mother was just a 14 or 15-year-old girl. Her family had just returned to live in Wingshan, Jinjiang, after years of evacuation. Most kids in her neighborhood had to quit school to help with farming. But my grandmother insisted my mom continue her education, even though the nearest school was nearly 10 kilometers away. The school itself sat isolated among vast rice paddies. The buildings were old and weathered, their tin roofs rusted and walls peeling and cracked. There were only a few classrooms, and 4 teachers sent from Saigon under the government's new economic program. By day, they taught. By night, they slept inside the school. Back then, no one thought it strange that teachers rested on the raised platforms, while students laid mats on the floor to sleep. One rainy season, heavy flooding made it impossible for students living far away to travel back and forth. So the teachers invited them to temporarily live at school to study for exams. My mother agreed, along with about 7 or 8 others. They brought rice and dried food to share, studied under oil lamps at night, and slept together in a large classroom. The first 3 nights passed without incident. But on the 4th night, everything changed. That evening, the rain came down hard, and the wind howled like a grieving spirit. Around 9 p.m., most of the students had gone to bed, but my mother stayed behind to study in room 3, a room at the end of the corridor, separated from the others. The wind screamed as it whipped across the metal roof. My mother sat hunched over her notebook when suddenly she heard footsteps outside. Heavy, uneven. Thud, thud, thud. At first, she thought someone was running in the yard, but the footsteps soon became rhythmic, like soldiers marching. 1, 2, 1, 2. A chill crept over her. She crept to the window and peered through the gap, and what she saw nearly stopped her heart. A long line of soldiers, several dozen, were marching across the schoolyard. They wore tattered military uniforms and sunken helmets, but their faces were pale as chalk, their eyes hollow and fixed forward. Some of them had no legs at all. Their bodies floated above the ground. Under the dim flicker of the oil lamp, the scene looked like something from the underworld. She couldn't scream, couldn't breathe. She grabbed her notebook and ran, trembling all over. She bolted the classroom door, just as a girl in her sleeping room screamed. The girl said she felt a hairy, foul-smelling hand, like a decaying corpse, groping all over her body. Then, one by one, The others in the room started to feel their legs being pulled, as if something invisible was crawling across the floor, lurking under their mats. They clung to each other in terror, too afraid to move or breathe. Only when the rooster crowed at dawn did the horror seem to fade. Near sunrise, my mother suddenly remembered she had left her notebook in room 3. The rain had stopped, so she asked her cousin to come with her. They had only taken a few steps from the dorm when something appeared. A blazing red fireball, about the size of a large bowl, suddenly floated into view, flickering like an oil flame. At first, it hovered in place. Then slowly, it began to bounce. And then, it charged at them. They both screamed and ran. The fireball gave chase, bouncing behind them like a cursed lantern. My mother nearly fell, but her cousin yanked her back up. They didn't stop until they slammed the door shut behind them. And then, just like that, the fire vanished. The next morning, the teachers gathered, whispering anxiously. One of the older ones, a local, finally sighed and confessed. This school was built over an old army barracks. Years ago, an entire platoon was ambushed here. Not one survived. Their bodies were buried in haste, unmarked and unprayed for. Their spirits are still here. After that, my mother and the others refused to stay overnight. Weeks later, the whole class was relocated to a different school in a nearby commune. But to this day, no one who ever slept in that school dares to speak of those nights, as if saying the words might wake something that never truly left.
The second one of today, the haunted military camp.
They say you should never call out names in a place you don't know, especially not one with a dark history. I laughed at that superstition, until I found myself pinned to my bed by unseen forces, screaming without a voice. My military training was supposed to be about discipline and survival. I never imagined that survival would mean fending off vengeful spirits I had accidentally awakened. This next story is living proof that not all warnings are just superstition. And I'm the main character of my own story. A story that still haunts me to this day. I'm from the Mekong Delta, born and raised in Dong Thap. What I'm about to tell you isn't something I heard from someone else. No, this happened to me during a time I wish I could erase from memory: military training in Hao Zhang. Before we went, some seniors warned us, "Brace yourself, kid. That place is haunted, full of ghosts." I thought they were just trying to scare us, but the moment I stepped foot inside that camp, I realized no one was joking. The military zone was deep in a Melaleuca forest, desolate and cold. The buildings were low tin-roofed barracks, the walkways muddy and slick. On the first night, I already sensed something was off, not with the surroundings, but with the air. A feeling I couldn't explain, like dozens of invisible eyes were watching from the shadows. I thought maybe it was just me, adjusting to a strange place. But from the second night onward, I was haunted by sleep paralysis. Every night, the moment I shut my eyes, something heavy would press down on my chest, like a slab of stone. I'd open my eyes, see the dim outlines of the room, but I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Sometimes, I'd hear faint groans right next to my ear, like someone wounded, gasping for breath. Then came that afternoon, the one I'll never forget. The sun was blazing, and we had a short break. Everyone found a cool place to nap. I laid out my mat on the floor, hoping to catch a quick rest. But just as I drifted off, I heard heavy footsteps entering the room. I opened my eyes, and there he was. A man, with wild, tangled hair, a furious scowl on his face, and eyes burning with rage. He stormed toward me, and stomped down hard onto my stomach. I couldn't breathe. My whole body froze. I struggled, tried to scream, but no sound came out. And then, just like that, he vanished. The next day, same time, I laid down in the same spot, and he returned, but this time, he wasn't alone. Beside him was a gaunt woman, her long hair covering most of her face. She walked over, sat on my chest, crushing the air out of my lungs. Her eyes were blank white, her mouth barely moving. Then suddenly, she screamed in a shrill, furious voice, "Don't you dare call my name!" I sobbed uncontrollably, even in my sleep. When I woke, I was drenched in sweat, like I'd just been dragged from a river. My heart pounded, and no one in the room had heard a thing. I started to think, what had I done? Then I remembered. A few days before, while we were cutting brush, clearing the overgrowth, we were goofing off. I'd jokingly yelled out names to my friends, teasing them. "Hey Lone, get over here. Where's Min? Come help." I had no idea that I might have accidentally called out the name of someone who was no longer alive. That night, I went behind the barracks, knelt down, and bowed 3 times. I prayed from the bottom of my heart. "If I've offended or disturbed you, please forgive me. I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." From that day forward, the sleep paralysis stopped. But the nightmare wasn't over. One afternoon, I visited 2 close friends at the far end of the barracks. The air was still, sunlight slipping through the cracks in the walls, casting long streaks across the floor. I laid down to rest. As soon as I fell asleep, the vision came. A young woman, in a tattered military student uniform, thrashing in terror, amidst a thicket of banana trees. A man loomed over her, eyes filled with lust and violence. He pinned her down, covered her mouth, and forced himself on her. She screamed in silence, her cries trapped inside her throat. The scene repeated over and over, seared into my mind. I jolted awake, my body soaked. I tried to sit up, and that's when I saw her. She was standing right beside my bed, wearing the same ripped uniform, arms limp at her sides, her face pale and vacant, body trembling violently. Her mouth let out muffled sobs, broken, anguished, the sound of a soul who had died in agony, still wandering in search of peace. I couldn't move, frozen in fear. Then a friend nudged me and asked, "Hey, you asleep?" The ghostly girl vanished, like a puff of smoke. Days later, I overheard someone say, "There used to be a female student here, who died mysteriously during her stay. They said it was a sudden illness, but everyone suspected something more sinister." After that, I never dared to nap at noon again. I just sat, eyes wide open, ears tuned to every noise. Because I knew, somewhere within that military camp, there were spirits still waiting to be set free.
The final story, The Haunted Pedicab Ride.
The most terrifying ghost stories aren't the ones that happen in abandoned houses at midnight, but the ones that unfold in broad daylight, on a familiar road, with an ordinary task. My grandmother learned this lesson on a trip to the market, a trip that started with a late pedicab driver and ended with a piece of ghost money burning a hole in his pocket. It was a chilling reminder that sometimes the passenger you pick up has already reached their final destination. This story was told to me by my grandmother, something I'll never forget, no matter how many times I hear her recount it. Usually, it's in the late afternoon, when she's peeling jackfruit under the eaves, her voice trembling slightly, as the sun casts long shadows across the yard. She said it happened in 1993, back when she was still strong and healthy, biking to the market every morning at the crack of dawn, to sell fruit. But that day, She took a pedicab ride she would never forget. Back in those days in Long Suyen, people went to the market by pedal-powered rickshaws, the kind with a small seat in the back for passengers, while the driver pedaled up front, through the foggy morning air. My grandmother had a regular driver named Uncle Tu, who picked her up every morning. They were like family. If he didn't show up on time, she'd be as anxious as if something terrible had happened. That morning, Uncle Tu arrived almost 20 minutes late. He was dripping with sweat, face pale as a sheet. The moment he saw her, he apologized repeatedly. Sorry, something happened, chilled me to the bone. Naturally, she scolded him like she always did.
What happened, Uncle Tu? You're never this late.
He just shook his head, pedaling slowly toward the market, and began to tell his story. That morning, on his way to her house like usual, just after crossing the water spinach bridge, a young woman had waved him down, near the intersection by the Ba Bao Canal, a quiet road lined with drooping coconut trees, and a cemetery just across the water. She wore a white ao ba ba and black pants. Her long black hair fell over half her face. Softly, she said,
"Uncle, can you take me to the cemetery road, please?"
Uncle Tu hesitated, but she looked gentle and sad, so he nodded. The entire ride, the girl said nothing, just stared off into the water, eyes distant and empty. He kept pedaling, but the wind coming off the canal felt cold, too cold for a summer morning. When they reached the intersection, in front of the cemetery, the girl suddenly raised her voice.
"Stop, let me off here."
Startled, Uncle Tu braked hard. Before he could even turn to ask her anything, the girl had already stepped off the cab and pressed a bill into his hand.
"Here's the fare," she said.
Then, without another word, she turned and walked down the narrow path, leading behind the cemetery, and vanished from sight in just a few steps. Uncle Tu didn't think much of it at the time. He just tucked the money into his shirt pocket and continued on his way to pick up my grandmother. But when they got to the market, and he pulled out the money to give her change, he nearly dropped his whole wallet. The bill the girl had given him had turned into joss paper, ghost money. Red ink, a demon's face, the kind burned for the dead. By the time Uncle Tu finished telling the story, his face was ghostly pale. His hands trembled as he pulled out the crumpled bill from his shirt. It smelled faintly of smoke, charred and curled at the edges. My grandmother went stiff with shock. She whispered,
"You picked up someone from the other side, Uncle Tu."
That very morning, after dropping her off, he pedaled straight back to the cemetery. He brought with him a bundle of paper offerings, incense, fruits, and stood before the nearest grave, bowing again and again, mumbling,
"If you have some sorrow left behind, please forgive me. I meant no harm. I'm just a poor man trying to make a living."
He burned all the ghost money, poured a cup of rice wine into the soil as an offering, and prayed for peace. From that day on, Uncle Tu swore he would never pick up anyone dressed in white near a cemetery again, even in broad daylight. And to this day, whenever someone asks my grandmother if she believes in ghosts, she just shakes her head, sighs, and says,
"Don't think ghosts only come at night. They're always around, especially the ones who died young, or died unjustly."
And in my memory, I still see the image clearly. Uncle Tu clutching that cursed joss paper, and that girl in the white ao ba ba, standing by the riverbank. Like a faded, flickering scene from a haunted film, forever burned into my mind.